There was a time, not so long ago, when this nation was seen as a blueprint for the future. A grand experiment in democracy, a beacon of innovation, a testament to the idea that people from every corner of the globe could unite under a single flag and forge a common destiny. It was called the future of humanity, a promise of progress etched into its very foundations. But that promise has fractured. Today, that same country is now fighting itself. But this is a war unlike any in history. It is not being fought with tanks rolling through city squares. There are no dogfights in the skies, no missiles streaking across the horizon. There are no invading armies marching across its borders. The enemy isn't a foreign power. The enemy is next door. The enemy is on the other end of the screen. The enemy, some have been led to believe, is anyone who thinks differently. This war is waged with far more insidious weapons. It is fought with anger, stoked daily by algorithms and amplified by outrage. It is fought with distrust, a poison that seeps into the bedrock of every institution, from the courts to the classrooms. It is fought with fear, fear of the other, fear of the future, fear of losing a way of life. And the casualties are the bonds that hold a society together, leaving behind millions of people who look at their fellow citizens and no longer believe they belong to the same nation. Tonight, we journey deep into the heart of this schism. We enter the story of the most divided country on Earth. We will trace the invisible battle lines that have been drawn through neighborhoods, workplaces, and even family dinner tables. This is not just a portrait of a nation in crisis, it is a warning. We are entering a place where neighbors who once shared backyard barbecues now see each other as existential enemies. A place where truth itself shattered into a million personalized realities, each catered to confirm a chosen belief. Where every election cycle feels less like a civic duty and more like a declaration of war. Where the nation's own history has been weaponized, becoming a battlefield for cultural dominance. And in the deafening silence between the shouting, one terrifying question hangs over everything. What happens when a superpower, a global titan built on an idea of unity and strength, stops believing in itself? What happens when the very concept of a shared identity evaporates, leaving a vacuum of purpose and a populace adrift in a sea of animosity? The world has seen empires fall to outside forces, but what happens when one rots from the inside out? To understand this collapse, you must first understand that this is no longer just politics. The traditional labels of left and right have become insufficient, almost meaningless. They fail to capture the sheer depth of the chasm that has opened up. It is psychological warfare, waged 24/7 through the screens we carry in our pockets, designed to keep us perpetually agitated and addicted to conflict. It is economic desperation, as the rungs on the ladder of opportunity are pulled up, leaving millions feeling abandoned and betrayed by the promise of prosperity. It is a profound cultural collapse, a war over symbols, language, and the very definition of the nation's soul. This is a battle for identity itself. And as the pressure mounts, as the rhetoric intensifies, a growing number of observers, historians, and even insiders are sounding the alarm. They believe the slow, grinding erosion has given way to something far more dangerous. They believe the breaking point has already begun. But the truth behind this division is darker and more complex than almost anyone realizes. It is not a simple story of two halves of a country that grew apart. The narrative presented in the daily news cycle of red versus blue, urban versus rural, is a dangerously simplistic illusion. Because this fracture did not happen overnight. It wasn't an accident of history, or an inevitable outcome of political disagreement. The seeds of this division were planted long ago in the soil of old grievances and unresolved conflicts. It was built slowly, methodically, deliberately, across decades. It was engineered in corporate boardrooms, in the halls of power, and in the hidden laboratories of social media. It was constructed by forces that understood a fundamental truth. A divided population is easier to control. A distracted population won't notice where the real power is shifting. We are about to pull back the curtain on this carefully constructed reality. We will follow the money, decode the propaganda, and expose the architecture of this division. And the deeper we go into this story, the more disturbing it becomes. This is the story of how a nation was turned against itself. And it starts now. For most of the 20th century, this country appeared unstoppable. It was an engine of progress, built on an almost mythic sense of destiny. After emerging from global conflict, it didn't just rebuild, it redefined what was possible. Factories, once churning out the arsenal of war, were retooled to forge the architecture of a new kind of peace. A peace defined by prosperity. The hum of the assembly line became the nation's heartbeat, promising a life of security and upward mobility for millions. This was the era of big shoulders, of grand projects, of a shared belief that tomorrow would inevitably be better than today. The dream was tangible. You could see it in the chrome of a new car, feel it in the foundation of a suburban home, and hear it in the confident chorus of a nation on the rise. Its power was absolute, projected across every domain of human endeavor. Its economy, a titan of production and consumption, didn't just lead the planet. It set the terms for global commerce. Its military, a network of bases and fleets of unprecedented scale, controlled the oceans and skies, underwriting a new world order. And its culture, a relentless export of ideas and images, reached every corner of the earth. It was a soft power more pervasive than any army. The stories it told, the music it created, the future it promised, these became the universal language of aspiration. Hollywood, technology, finance, democracy. These weren't just industries or ideals. They were pillars of a modern empire, each reinforcing the other. Hollywood manufactured the dream. Technology promised an endless frontier of innovation. Finance provided the capital to fuel it all. And democracy was the moral bedrock, the justification for its global leadership. Together, they projected an irresistible image of power. To billions of people, both inside and outside its borders, it wasn't just one country among many. It represented the modern world itself, the blueprint for success, the destination at the end of history. It was the place where the future was being built, and the rest of the world watched, listened, and learned, hoping to catch even a faint echo of its momentum. But beneath the shimmering image of strength, a different story was unfolding, quietly, and then all at once. The foundations, which had seemed unshakable for generations, were being hollowed out from within. At first, they were just hairline fractures, visible only to those who knew where to look. A quiet anxiety that the dream was becoming harder to grasp. A nagging feeling that the promise of endless growth had a hidden cost. Slowly, these subtle fissures began to widen, spreading through the bedrock of the nation's confidence. Entire industries, once the backbone of the nation's prosperity, vanished, outsourced to faraway lands in the name of efficiency and profit. The jobs that had built the middle class, stable, well-paying, a source of dignity, were replaced by precarious, low-wage service work, or by nothing at all. As the factories fell silent, communities that had been built around them began to collapse. Main streets withered, schools closed. A quiet despair settled over entire regions, leaving behind a landscape of economic ruin and broken promises. With this erosion of economic security came a deeper erosion of faith. Millions stopped trusting the very institutions that were supposed to protect them, the government that promised opportunity, the corporations that promised loyalty, the media that promised truth. And then, in the midst of this growing uncertainty and disillusionment, something changed. The slow decay gave way to a sudden, seismic shift. The ground rules that had governed public life for decades were rewritten overnight. Politics stopped being a simple disagreement over taxes or policy. It became a battle for the nation's soul. It became identity. Your political affiliation was no longer just a choice you made in the voting booth. It was a declaration of who you were, what tribe you belonged to, and what you stood against. It defined your morality, your worldview, your very sense of self. The space for common ground evaporated, replaced by a chasm of mutual suspicion and contempt. In this new reality, people no longer argued over policies, they argued over reality itself. The very concept of objective truth came under assault. Facts became flexible, shaped to fit a chosen narrative. Every news report, every scientific study, every historical event was filtered through a partisan lens, accepted or rejected, not based on evidence, but on whether it supported your side. Two people could look at the exact same event and see two completely different worlds. One side came to believe the nation they loved was being stolen from them by corrupt elites and hostile outsiders, its culture and values erased. For them, the fight was a desperate act of preservation. The other side believed that the foundations of democracy itself were dying, threatened by authoritarianism and a rising tide of intolerance. For them, the fight was a last stand for the Republic's founding ideals. Both saw themselves as patriots. Both saw the other as an existential threat. This national schism fractured the country at its most intimate levels. Families stopped speaking, torn apart by political arguments that felt too personal to forgive. Lifelong friendships ended over social media posts. Schools became battlegrounds over curriculum, and neighbors viewed each other with suspicion. And through it all, the internet, once hailed as a tool for connection and enlightenment, became a super spreader of discord. Its algorithms learned our deepest anxieties and biases and transformed our collective outrage into a permanent, profitable addiction. And somewhere inside this chaos, powerful forces, from media conglomerates to political operatives to tech giants, learned how to profit from the division. They discovered that a united, thoughtful public is bad for business. A divided, emotional public, however, is a captive audience. They built a vast, invisible architecture of outrage, designed not to inform, but to provoke. Because anger keeps people watching, it triggers a primal response that bypasses critical thought, making us more susceptible to manipulation. Fear keeps people voting. It simplifies complex problems into a struggle of good versus evil, us versus them, making us desperate for a strong leader to protect us. And hatred. Hatred is the ultimate fuel. It doesn't just power a news cycle or an election cycle. It keeps entire systems alive. This state of perpetual conflict feels like the new normal. But it is not an accident. It is the result of 1,000 different choices made over decades. So to understand how one of the most powerful and envied countries in history reached this point of fracture, we have to go back. We have to go back to moments most people have forgotten or never connect. Decisions made in quiet boardrooms, laws passed with little fanfare, technological shifts that seemed benign at the time. These are the moments that quietly reshape the future, setting in motion the very forces that now threaten to tear the country apart. This is the story of how the modern world was broken. Every divided country has a beginning, a moment in its history where the seeds of discord were sown, often hidden in plain sight. This is the story of one such beginning. It doesn't start with a war or a rebellion, but with something far more seductive. It begins with a promise, a grand, sweeping promise whispered into the ear of a generation weary of war and sacrifice. The promise of a new era, an American century, where prosperity was not just a dream, but a birthright. After World War II, America emerged from the ashes of global conflict, not just victorious, but transformed. It stood richer, stronger, and more influential than any empire before it. The nation's industrial might, once dedicated to the war effort, was now unleashed upon itself, forging a new world of consumer abundance. Factories, once churning out tanks and planes, now produced automobiles, refrigerators, and televisions. They roared with the sound of progress. Suburbs, meticulously planned and rapidly constructed, expanded across the landscape, offering a slice of the American dream to millions. The middle class, the bedrock of the nation, didn't just grow. It exploded, creating a society of homeowners and consumers on a scale never before seen. For the millions who benefited from this unprecedented boom, the narrative was simple and powerful. Hard work would be rewarded. The future would be brighter than the past. Their children would have more than they did. Millions believed, with unwavering conviction, that the future would only get better. It was an intoxicating vision of linear progress, an endless upward climb. But hidden underneath this shimmering surface of prosperity was a profound and dangerous contradiction. The foundation of this golden age was built on fault lines, deep and ancient. Because while the country projected an image of unbreakable unity to the world, a beacon of freedom and democracy, it was already deeply structurally fractured inside. The promise of prosperity was not extended to everyone. The American dream was a story some could only watch from the outside. Race, class, religion, geography. These weren't new problems. They were the nation's original sins, the unresolved conflicts woven into its very fabric from the beginning. The divisions had always existed, simmering beneath the surface. For a time, the sheer force of post-war economic growth acted as a powerful sedative. They were simply buried beneath the national obsession with progress and consumption, papered over by a shared sense of national purpose. But they were not gone. They were waiting. And then came the Cold War. A new kind of conflict, fought not on battlefields, but in the shadows, in the headlines, and in the minds of the people. a struggle for global dominance against a new ideological enemy. Fear became national policy. The abstract threat of nuclear annihilation became a daily reality, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. The government, in its effort to protect its citizens, began to demand a new kind of vigilance, a new kind of conformity. Communism was presented not just as a geopolitical adversary, but as an existential infection, a moral and spiritual disease that could corrupt the nation from within. It was a threat that could look like your neighbor, your teacher, your co-worker. And so, suspicion spread like a virus through the bloodstream of the nation. The fear of the external enemy was turned inward. Neighbors accused neighbors of disloyalty. Friendships were shattered. Careers were destroyed. Ambitious politicians quickly learned to weaponize this paranoia, using it as a tool to consolidate power and silence dissent. The old fractures in society became pathways for this new poison to spread. And then, in the middle of this perfect storm of prosperity and paranoia, a new technology entered the American home. And television changed everything. It was a revolution in communication. For the first time in human history, millions of people from every corner of the country could consume the exact same stories, the same images, the same narratives at the exact same time. It created a shared national experience, a powerful, invisible bond. But this new power was concentrated in the hands of a very few. A handful of networks, a handful of executives, a handful of anchors. Mass media did not merely report reality. It curated it. It framed it. It shaped reality. It decided which stories were important and which were ignored, who the heroes were and who were the villains. And those who controlled the screen, who mastered this new language of moving images and sound, discovered they could do more than just sell products or report the news. They could evoke powerful, predictable responses on a mass scale. They controlled emotion itself. In this new ecosystem, the lines between information, entertainment, and propaganda began to blur. The anxieties of the Cold War and the aspirations of the consumer boom were fed back to the public through a single, glowing screen, creating a potent cocktail of fear and desire. This was the paradox of the post-war era, a nation experiencing unprecedented unity through mass media, while simultaneously being primed for division by the rhetoric of fear. A society told it was the greatest on earth, yet encouraged to see enemies everywhere, even in its own reflection. The airwaves crackled with warnings. The narratives were simplified, polarized. Us versus them. Freedom versus tyranny. Good versus evil. Nuance was a casualty. Critical thinking was discouraged in favor of patriotic allegiance. The stage was set. The promise of unity and the politics of fear were on a collision course. The carefully constructed consensus of the 1950s was more fragile than anyone knew. And as the decade turned, the cracks in the foundation would begin to break wide open. Then the country exploded. The civil rights movement forced America to confront a truth it had avoided for generations. Millions demanded equality. Others resisted with fury. Cities burned. Leaders were assassinated. Trust shattered. The Vietnam War deepened the wound. Young Americans watched body bags return home, while politicians promised victory. And for the first time, millions stopped believing their government. That distrust would never fully disappear. Because once a society loses faith in truth, everything changes. Then came Watergate. The President of the United States caught spying on political opponents, lying, manipulating, corrupting democracy itself. The scandal confirmed something terrifying. The system people trusted most could betray them. And while Americans fought cultural wars in the streets, another transformation was happening quietly. One driven not by ideology, but by money. Factories once powered entire towns. Steel, cars, manufacturing. For millions of Americans, stable work created stable lives. But beginning in the 1970s and accelerating into the 1980s, corporations discovered something. Labor was cheaper overseas. Slowly, industries left. Then, rapidly, entire communities collapsed almost overnight. The jobs disappeared, but the anger stayed. Small towns hollowed out. Drug addiction rose. Hope faded. Meanwhile, major cities became richer. Technology boomed. Wall Street expanded. America was splitting into two economic realities. One side experienced globalization as opportunity. The other experienced it as abandonment, and politicians from both parties failed to stop it. That failure planted seeds that would eventually transform the entire political system. But then came the internet, and division entered a completely new era. The internet promised to connect humanity. It connected and amplified division. Anyone could speak, publish, challenge power. Then algorithms learned a darker truth. Outrage travels faster than facts. Fear and anger keep us scrolling and paying attention. Platforms rewired behavior. Feeds became mirrors. Echo chambers formed. Different facts, different enemies, different fears. One national conversation split into competing tribes. Politicians adapted. Division beat unity. Elections intensified everything. Populism surged. Long-ignored citizens heard their anger echoed back. Elites were cast as betrayers. The factories were gone. The wars dragged on. Prices climbed. Trust fell through the floor. Politics got louder, more emotional, more tribal. Every election framed as existential, good versus evil. News fueled it. Social media accelerated it. Politicians exploited it. Citizens absorbed it day after day, until exhaustion set in. Then, a global pandemic. Cities went silent, schools closed, isolation spread. Instead of unity, the rift widened. Masks, vaccines, even science turned tribal. Conspiracies exploded. Distrust soared. Institutions questioned and condemned. Experts questioned and condemned. Neighbors questioned and condemned. Inequality widened. Markets up. Small businesses down. Mental health collapsing in the quiet. Pressure broke into streets and screens. A crowd stormed the Capitol. The world watched live. To some, an attack on democracy. To others, a desperate cry from those convinced democracy had already failed. Shared reality fractured. History warns what follows: instability, extremism, violence, collapse. Lines hardened. Urban versus rural. Coasts versus heartland. Educated versus struggling, young versus old. Media ecosystems split into separate worlds. Online communities built rival narratives. Feeding on confirming content, compromise became impossible. Trust didn't just fade, it disappeared. The story shifts from noise to numbness. Empires don't fall first in streets, they fade in minds. Hope thins. Tomorrow feels smaller. Homes slip out of reach. Debt stalks mailboxes. People work harder, feel poorer. Screens multiply, connection doesn't. Loneliness spreads in crowded cities. We once landed on the moon, now we doubt the vote. A model built for the middle class trains the young to expect less. Identity becomes a battlefield. Who belongs? Who owns the past? Who defines the flag? Who claims the future? No neutral ground. Schools, corporations, universities, sports sanctuary. Everything political. The most dangerous divide isn't red or blue. It's chemical. Outrage as addiction. Algorithms feed it. Extremes rise. Nuance vanishes. Information turns into identity. Cliques become tribe. Arguments don't bridge walls, they fortify them. Systems learn the math. Anger converts into donations, ratings, engagement. Division pays. If outrage fuels power and money, who cashes in on peace? Allies glance over, uneasy. Rivals lean in, confident. A split superpower blinks on the world stage. Foreign actors study our seams. They don't hack votes, they hack emotions. Propaganda rides the feed. Bots learn our fears. The battlefield is internal. Attention is the weapon. Control what we fear, what we hate, what we believe control the society. Silence. And then the world started watching. Great powers rarely fall from invasion alone. They weaken within Rome, the USSR. Distrust erodes the beams before walls ever crack. Now, many fear a new unstable era, not from lack of wealth or weapons, but unity. Millions distrust elections, media corporations each other. Democracy grows fragile. Consequences ripple global. Markets shake. Alliances wobble. Technology races ahead while trust lags behind. Trade, energy, security, so much of it leans on US stability. A deep fracture here sends shockwaves everywhere. But the deepest cost isn't on spreadsheets. It's human. Anxiety, loneliness, hopelessness. Children raised on fear. Algorithms feeding outrage. News rewarding panic. Politics rewarding extremes. Citizens recast as combatants defending, arguing, afraid. No nation survives when neighbors become enemies. Yet crisis can be a turning point. Shared purpose can re-emerge. Manipulation can be rejected if we recognize it before the damage can't be undone. The same networks that spread division can carry repair. The same hands that scroll can vote, volunteer, rebuild. We choose what we amplify. We choose what we believe. We choose each other, or we don't. Through the storm, a horizon appears. Not certainty, direction. The most divided country is fighting over memory, identity, meaning, reality itself. Civilizations don't just fall to enemies. They falter when people lose faith in one another. Division grows slowly, fear, manipulation, economic pain, isolation, until neighbors become enemies. History is still unwritten. The future depends on rediscovering trust, empathy, a shared reality. Without them, even the strongest nations fracture. A sunrise breaks. Diverse hands lift the same flag. A fracture begins to repair, not by command, by choice. We choose what we amplify. We choose what we believe. We choose each other, or we don't. If a country can't agree on truth, what happens next? This story isn't over. The next chapter may shape the world. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more cinematic deep dives. To understand information-powered geopolitics, watch The Silent War for Human Attention. The battles ahead may be fought not with bullets, but with belief.